I came to enjoy my dream cottage, then found my son's family already unpacking their boxes. I stood in the doorway of the cottage I had spent 32 years dreaming about, and I watched a stranger's curtains hanging in my windows. Except it wasn't a stranger. It was my own son carrying a box marked kitchen through the front door of a house he did not own, into a life he had decided was his, while I was still holding the key in my trembling hand. My name is Elizabeth. I am 71 years old, and before I tell you what happened next, before I tell you how I took back what was mine without raising my voice even once, I need you to do two things for me. Hit that like button because it tells me you're here, really here with me in this story. And subscribe because there is more truth coming where this came from, more life, more of what happens when people think an old woman won't fight back. Now in the comments tell me where you're watching from tonight. I want to picture you there, wherever you are, sitting with a cup of tea or coffee because I promise you by the end of this you'll want one. Let me take you back to the beginning because you can't understand the size of what was taken from me unless you understand how long I carried it. My husband Frank and I bought that piece of land on Maple Hollow Road when we were both 39 years old. We didn't buy a finished house. We bought 4 acres of overgrown brush, a rusted fence, and a view of the mountains that made my chest ache the first time I saw it. Frank was a machinist. I taught 3rd grade for 26 years. We were not wealthy people. But every single summer, every vacation we might have taken somewhere warm and easy, we put toward that land instead. We built the cottage in pieces, the way ordinary people build a dream when they don't have the money to do it all at once. A foundation one year, a roof the next. Frank framed out that porch himself on his knees. The summer his back had already started giving him trouble, because he refused to let anyone else build it for me. We used to sit out there in the evenings when it was just a slab and 2 folding chairs, and Frank would say, "This is where we'll grow old, Liz. This is where we'll watch the grandkids run around barefoot in that grass." He said it so many times it became a kind of prayer between us. Frank passed 6 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, no warning, the kind of ending that leaves you standing in a doorway of your own life wondering how you're supposed to keep walking through it. After the funeral, after the casseroles stopped coming and the phone calls slowed down, I made a decision. I was going to finish the cottage. Not as a monument to grief, but as the promise Frank and I made to each other on that slab with the folding chairs. I sold our house in town. I used every bit of Frank's pension payout and my own retirement savings, and I hired a contractor to finish what we started. New windows, proper kitchen, a little stone path down to the creek that Frank always said he wanted. It took a year and a half. I cried more than once standing in that half-built kitchen, missing him and also feeling for the first time in a long while like I had something ahead of me instead of only behind me. My son's name is Andrew. He's 44 now, married to a woman named Kimberly, and they have 2 children, Lily, who's 11, and Noah, who just turned 8. I love those children with everything in me. I want you to understand that because what I'm about to tell you is not about not loving my family. It's about what happens when love gets mistaken for a blank check. Andrew knew about the cottage his whole life. He grew up hearing about it the way other kids hear about fairy tales. When he was young, we'd drive out on weekends and he'd run through the unfinished frame of the house pretending it was a fort. As he got older, and especially after Frank died, Andrew started talking about the cottage differently. Not as my dream, but as an inheritance he was simply waiting to collect. He'd say things like, "When that place is finished, Mom, it'll be perfect for the kids to grow up near." Or, "That cottage is really too much house for just you." I brushed it off as a son being a son, worrying about his aging mother, wanting to be close. I was wrong about what it meant. The cottage was finished in April of this year. I planned a trip, my first real trip since Frank passed, 3 weeks visiting my sister in another state, something I'd put off for years because I was too consumed with finishing the house. I told Andrew where the spare key was hidden, under the ceramic frog by the back step, only because I asked him to check on the place once a week, water the 2 rose bushes I just planted, make sure a pipe hadn't burst. That was the entirety of what I asked of him. Check on the house. Water the roses. I came home 2 days early. My sister had a doctor's appointment come up and I didn't want to be underfoot, so I drove the 6 hours back without telling anyone, thinking I'd surprise myself with a quiet homecoming, a cup of tea on the porch Frank built, the first night alone in my finished dream. Instead, I pulled into my own driveway and found a moving truck backed up to my front door. I sat in my car for a full minute just staring, thinking maybe I had the wrong address, though of course I didn't, because I could see the stone path down to the creek, the one Frank asked for, right there in front of me. I got out. I walked up the steps I paid to have built. And I opened the front door of my own home to find Kimberly directing two movers on where to place a sectional sofa that was not mine. In a living room I had decorated myself only weeks before, my furniture nowhere to be seen. Andrew came around the corner from the kitchen holding a box, and when he saw me, I watched something flicker across his face. Not shame. Calculation. Like he was recalculating a plan in real time. "Mom," he said. "You're early." Those were his first words to me. Not hello. Not an explanation. "You're early." As though I had walked in on a schedule I wasn't supposed to know about, in a house that belonged to me. I asked him very calmly what exactly was happening in my home. And Andrew, standing in my kitchen with a box of dishes that were not mine, told me that he and Kimberly had talked it over and decided the cottage made more sense for a young, growing family than for one woman living alone. He said I could take the guest room. He said it like he was doing me a favor. He said, "You always said this place was for the family, Mom. This is us being the family." I want you to sit with that phrase for a second because it's the phrase that revealed everything to me. This is us being the family. As if I, the woman who scraped together 32 years of savings, who watched her husband build a porch on a failing back, who buried that husband and finished the house alone in her grief, was somehow not the family. As if my presence in my own dream was now a technicality to be managed. I did not scream. I want to be honest with you, some part of me wanted to. But I have lived 71 years, and I have learned that the women who win are rarely the ones who scream in the doorway. They're the ones who go quiet, who go still, who start thinking 3 steps ahead while everyone around them assumes they're simply too stunned to fight. So I said, "I see," and I walked back out to my car and I drove to a motel 11 minutes away, and I sat on the edge of that motel bed and I did not cry. I made a list. Here is what most people don't understand about a mother who built her whole life around a family that eventually forgets whose hands built the foundation. We are not weak. We are patient. And patience, when it's finally spent, becomes something very close to precision. The first thing on my list was simple. The cottage was in my name. Only my name. Frank and I had never added Andrew to the deed, not out of distrust but simply because there had never been a reason to, and thank God for that oversight, because it meant that legally nothing Andrew or Kimberly did inside that house changed one single fact: it was mine. The second thing on my list was my neighbor Carol, who has lived 2 properties down from the cottage for 11 years and who happens to be, conveniently, a retired paralegal. I called her from that motel room, and within 20 minutes she was in her car driving over to sit with me. Carol did not tell me to calm down. She did not tell me to think of the grandchildren. She poured me a cup of gas station coffee from her thermos, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Elizabeth, they moved into your house without your permission while you were out of state. Do you understand what that is?" I did understand. It's called unlawful occupancy. And whether or not it's your own flesh and blood standing in your kitchen, the law does not care whose blood it is. It cares whose name is on the deed. The third thing on my list was Mr. Doyle, an attorney Carol had worked with for years, a man in his 60s with a gravel voice and absolutely no patience for family sob stories dressed up as legal arguments. I met with him the next morning. I told him everything. He asked me one question that I will remember for the rest of my life. He said, "Mrs. Elizabeth, do you want to punish your son, or do you want your house back?" And I told him the truth. I wanted my house back. Punishing Andrew was never really the point. Making him understand permanently that love does not entitle you to theft, that was the point. Mr. Doyle drafted a formal notice. Not a phone call, not a tearful conversation at the kitchen table, but a legal document delivered by a process server to my son's new address, which, ironically, was my address. It gave Andrew and Kimberly 72 hours to vacate the premises or face formal eviction proceedings, the same proceedings you'd use against any occupant with no legal claim to a property. I know what some of you are thinking. That sounds harsh for a mother to do to her own son. And I sat with that discomfort too, believe me. I am not a cruel woman. But I want you to understand something about the days that followed, something that told me I had made exactly the right decision. When Andrew received that notice, he did not call me to apologize. He called me to accuse me of humiliating him. He said I was choosing a piece of property over my own grandchildren. He said Kimberly was devastated, that Lily had already picked out her bedroom, that I was, in his words, acting like this was ever really just yours. That sentence again. Just yours. As if 32 years of saving, of Frank's aching back, of a widow finishing a house alone through grief, amounted to nothing more than a technicality standing between my son and what he'd already decided was his inheritance, years before I was even gone. I did not raise my voice on that call either. I told him, Andrew, I love you. And I love Lily and Noah more than you will understand until you are 71 years old and watching your own children treat your life's work as a formality. But you do not get to steal from me and call it love. You have 72 hours. They left on the second day, not the third. Kimberly, I heard from Carol, who watched from her porch with what I can only describe as grim satisfaction, was in tears loading boxes back into that same truck. Andrew did not speak to me for nearly 2 months after that. Now, here is the part of the story I really want you to hear, because this is where it stops being about a house and starts being about something bigger. Word travels in families, even families that don't talk directly to each other. My sister called me. Andrew's mother-in-law called me, a woman I'd met maybe 4 times, just to say she supported what I'd done and wished she'd had the nerve to do something similar decades ago with her own son-in-law. And slowly, quietly, something shifted. Not because I forced an apology out of Andrew, but because the silence gave him room to actually sit with what he'd done instead of explaining it away in the moment. 2 months after they moved out, Andrew showed up at my cottage alone. No boxes, no truck, just him, standing at the bottom of the stone path Frank asked for, looking smaller than I'd seen him look in years. He didn't ask to come in. He stood right there and he said, Mom, I've been telling myself for months that I did nothing wrong, that you'd have said yes eventually anyway, that I was just moving the timeline up. He paused for a long time. And then he said, but I moved my family into your house while you were sleeping in a motel 11 minutes away. I don't think there's a version of that where I was right. I didn't run to hug him. I didn't tell him it was all forgotten. I told him the truth, which was that I forgave him, because he is my son and I will love him until the day I die, but that forgiveness and forgetting are not the same thing, and that the deed would remain in my name, exactly as it always should have been. Here's where I'll tell you the rest quickly because I know you're waiting for it. Andrew and Kimberly bought their own home 8 months later, a modest place across town, entirely their own, earned rather than assumed. Lily and Noah visit me at the cottage most weekends now, and I sit on that porch Frank built with his aching back, and I watch them run barefoot through the grass exactly the way he said they would, all those years ago on a slab with 2 folding chairs. The difference is now, when they run through that grass, everyone in that family understands exactly whose grass it is, and exactly what it cost to grow. I think about that moment in the doorway often, the moving truck, the sectional sofa that wasn't mine, my son's face doing the math on whether he could talk his way out of what he'd already decided to do. And I think about how easy it would have been for me, at 71, tired and freshly betrayed, to simply give in, to take the guest room, to let This Is Us being the family become the final word on 32 years of my life. But a dream you built with your own hands, and your husband's aching back, and your own grief carried alone through a year and a half of finishing what love started, is not a technicality. It is not a formality waiting for someone younger to collect. It is yours and it stays yours until you decide freely and on your own terms to give it away. If this story meant something to you, if any part of it reminded you of your own life, your own home, your own quiet strength that people mistook for softness, I want to hear it. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and tell me if you've ever had to take back something that was always supposed to be yours. Like this video, subscribe if you're not already part of this family here, and I'll see you in the next story. This is Elizabeth, and this was my dream cottage taken back one quiet decision at a time.